Elena had always walked the world with quiet grace, her presence like a soft breeze on a spring morning. As a final-year literature student, her days were filled with dusty books, handwritten notes, and dreams too delicate to share. She had spent most of her college life unnoticed, hidden behind her brother's towering shadow and her own shyness. But in her heart bloomed a tender love, one that had grown over time for Leon, her elder brother's best friend. Leon was everything she thought love should be: charming, composed, and protective. He had known her since she was just a little girl, but now that she was older, something had changed between them, or so she believed. Their conversations turned longer, his glances more meaningful, and the way he said her name felt like poetry. She never told her brother, fearing his reaction, so their moments together remained secret. It thrilled her, the sweetness of being wanted, of being chosen by someone she adored for so long. She believed in Leon more than she believed in herself. They started meeting in quiet places: the old library, empty streets lit by amber dusk, and cozy cafes tucked away from the world. Leon never held her hand in public, never called her when his friends were around, but Elena thought it was all part of their secret romance. He told her stories about his business, his childhood with her brother, and how tired he was of women who only loved him for his wealth. Elena listened to every word with her eyes shining, believing he saw something different in her, something real. They exchanged books, letters, and stolen kisses when no one was looking. Every message from him made her heart flutter like pages turning in a breeze. Elena never questioned why he never introduced her to anyone or why she didn't exist in his world outside of their little bubble. She was too busy falling deeper, every glance from him a thread binding her soul to his. To her, he was not just a man. He was the future she dreamed of, and the love she believed was hers alone. But Leon was a man with shadows Elena couldn't see, and memories he hadn't truly let go of. His past with Isabel, the woman who had left him for her studies in France, still lingered in corners of his mind. When he looked at Elena, it wasn't always her he saw, but echoes of someone else. His friends often teased him, laughing behind his back about how he had found a replacement that looked just like Isabel but younger and sweeter. Elena had no idea what was whispered when she wasn't around, or how hollow Leon's heart still was. He kept his secrets buried, never once giving Elena reason to doubt him. She never questioned why he sometimes grew distant or why his eyes seemed to search for something else when he looked at her. She gave him all her trust, her love, and her innocence, believing that love was enough to heal even the oldest wounds. But the truth was beginning to stir in silence, waiting to crush her fragile world. She had no idea betrayal was blooming in the very soil she planted her dreams. One afternoon, Elena arrived early at a cafe where they planned to meet, only to overhear something that shattered her calm. Sitting behind a bookshelf, she heard Leon's voice, laughing with his friends, unaware of her presence. "She looks so much like Isabel," one of them said. "Honestly, man, it's eerie. You sure you're not just replacing her?" There was a pause, and then Leon replied, "I don't know, maybe. But it's easier this way. Elena doesn't ask questions." The words stabbed her deeper than any knife could. She sat frozen, her breath caught in her throat, her hands trembling. The man she loved saw her not for who she was, but as a shadow of someone else. Her heart cracked in that moment, not loudly, but silently and painfully. Everything inside her that felt safe now felt like a lie. Her world tilted, and she could no longer tell if the love she felt was even real. When Leon walked in and saw her sitting there, his smile faded for a split second before returning. Elena looked at him with wide, wounded eyes, but said nothing about what she had heard. She smiled too, though it felt like her face would break from the effort. Inside, a storm was already rising: questions, doubts, and unbearable pain. But she couldn't speak, not yet. Part of her still hoped she misunderstood, that it was just a bad joke or a one-time slip. She spent the rest of the afternoon pretending, laughing when she wanted to cry, holding his hand even though it now felt cold. Leon never noticed, or maybe he did and chose to ignore it. That night, when she returned home, Elena wept silently into her pillow, hugging herself tightly. The man she thought loved her had never seen her, not really. And in that moment, something inside her began to break. The days that followed were a blur for Elena, filled with mechanical movements and hollow smiles. She continued going to class, scribbling notes she barely understood, her thoughts consumed by the memory of Leon's voice mocking her love. Every time she looked in the mirror, she began to question if she really was her own person or just a reflection of Isabel. She noticed the shape of her eyes, the curve of her smile. All the features she once thought made her special now felt like a cruel imitation. Her heart ached with confusion and sorrow, but she still couldn't bring herself to confront Leon. Part of her still clung to hope, like a child gripping a broken toy. Maybe he didn't mean it. Maybe she misunderstood. But late at night, when the world was quiet and she was alone, those words echoed louder than ever. The innocence of her love was slowly being poisoned by doubt. Her brother, Thomas, remained unaware of everything, happily inviting Leon over to their home as usual. Elena dreaded those visits now, feeling the suffocating tension every time Leon entered the room. He acted like nothing had changed, as if their stolen moments still held magic. But for Elena, the magic was gone, replaced by an unbearable weight pressing against her chest. She would sit quietly at the dinner table, barely eating, her eyes lowered while Leon joked with Thomas like they were still teenagers. When their eyes met, he smiled at her, but it no longer warmed her heart. It burned. She wanted to scream, to tell her brother everything, to expose the man who had deceived her. But her shame held her back, her fear of being blamed, misunderstood, or seen as foolish. So she swallowed her pain, day after day, while her soul grew thinner, more fragile, ready to shatter. Everything worsened the day Isabel returned to town. Elena first saw her outside the university, tall, stunning, with golden hair that shimmered in the sun and an aura of effortless confidence. Isabel hugged Leon like no time had passed, and Leon didn't hesitate. Elena stood across the street, watching them, her hands clenched at her sides as her chest heaved with silent sobs. Leon didn't even glance in her direction. He didn't acknowledge her presence at all, as if she were a stranger walking by. Her heart dropped to the pit of her stomach. There was no confusion now, no misunderstanding. The man she loved had discarded her the moment the real Isabel returned. Her presence, her love, her soul, all of it had been invisible. She ran from the scene, her tears mixing with the rain that had begun to fall, each drop a cruel reminder of how cold the world could be. The next day, fate struck another blow. Isabel approached her on campus, dressed in elegance and speaking with a voice like honey laced with venom. "You're the girl Leon's been seeing, aren't you?" she asked sweetly. Elena froze, unsure how to respond, her throat tight. Isabel smiled wider, tilting her head like she was studying something amusing. "You're pretty. I see why he picked you. He always had a type." Then, in a lower voice, she added, "But let's not pretend it was anything serious. He never stopped loving me." Her words hit Elena like glass shards, cutting through every layer of trust and dignity. "He told me everything," Isabel continued, "about how you made it easy. So sweet, so obedient. Men like him get bored fast." Elena couldn't breathe. Her legs felt weak, her heart bruised beyond recognition. She walked away in silence, her eyes brimming with tears, her body trembling from the humiliation. By the end of that week, the whispers had started. Leon's friends laughed behind her back, calling her the stand-in. In class, even the silence mocked her. Elena no longer smiled, no longer found joy in the books she once loved. Every page reminded her of the man who used her heart like a placeholder. Her brother still didn't know, and she kept it that way, but inside, she was breaking. At night, she would cry until her chest ached, her pillow soaked in sorrow. The ache was no longer just about Leon, it was about herself, how easily she believed in something so false. Her world, once filled with dreams and poetry, had turned into a bleak poem of betrayal. But in the depths of that despair, a tiny spark of anger began to flicker, not at Leon or Isabel, but at herself. She realized she had given everything and received only shadows in return. And maybe it was time to start seeing herself again. Elena began withdrawing from everything she once loved, finding comfort only in silence and solitude. She stopped attending social events, skipped campus gatherings, and avoided every hallway where Leon might pass. Her friends noticed the change in her, but didn't understand the depth of her pain. To them, she was simply tired, overwhelmed by studies or stress, but inside, she was crumbling. Her heart was no longer breaking, it was already broken, and now it was just trying to survive. Even the sound of Leon's name made her stomach turn, her mind replaying those cruel moments again and again. Isabel's voice haunted her dreams, repeating every humiliating word with a sweet and twisted smile. At times, Elena stared at her reflection, wondering if she even knew who she was anymore. She hated the way she resembled someone else, someone who had stolen everything from her. Every time she tried to breathe, the air felt too heavy to carry. It was during one of those numb afternoons that Elena decided to visit the campus bookstore, just to escape her dorm room's suffocating walls. She walked through the aisles absent-mindedly, fingers brushing old paperbacks, pretending to care. Then she heard a gentle voice beside her, asking, "You like Wilde or Bronte?" She turned to see a tall man with warm hazel eyes and a crooked smile, holding a copy of The Picture of Dorian Gray. His name was Adrian, and unlike everyone else lately, his eyes didn't look through her. They looked into her. She smiled faintly and replied, "Bronte. Wilde's too cynical right now." He chuckled softly, sensing the heaviness in her words but not pushing. There was something soothing about him. No pressure, no charm that felt rehearsed. Just presence. He didn't ask her name or her story, but for the first time in weeks, Elena felt seen. Adrian began appearing in her days like sunlight after a long storm, quiet, warm, and unannounced. He started sitting beside her in the library, always at the far table where no one else went. He asked about her writing, listened when she talked, and never once tried to fix her pain with empty words. Elena found herself talking more than she expected, though she never told him about Leon or Isabel. She just needed someone to hear her, really hear her without judgment. Adrian spoke about books, life, and small things like how the city smelled after rain. His laughter was soft, genuine, without sharpness or cruelty. Elena began to look forward to his presence, even if part of her still held back. She didn't know if she was ready for anything more. But his kindness didn't ask for more. It simply existed, patiently, gently, like a balm on wounds she hadn't realized needed healing. Meanwhile, Leon's world was slowly turning bitter in ways he hadn't expected. Though Isabel had returned and tried to resume their relationship, things were not the same. Her words were sharp behind closed doors, her love filled with conditions and comparisons. Leon started noticing things he had once ignored, how she used affection like a weapon, how she smiled only when she won. He began to remember Elena, not as a mirror of Isabel, but as someone who made him feel peace. It hit him late one night, alone in his apartment, how cruel he had been. He remembered her soft laughter, the way she held books like treasures, the way she believed in him. And now she was gone. She didn't message. She didn't ask questions. She had vanished, and for the first time, he felt truly abandoned. The silence she left behind was louder than any confrontation could have been. It echoed inside him, and he realized he missed her more than he ever missed Isabel. But Elena didn't care about Leon's regrets anymore. Not really. She was still hurting, still piecing herself back together, but her healing had already begun. With Adrian's quiet companionship, she started writing again, poems, letters, and stories she never intended to share. Her words were filled with sadness, but also strength. She didn't want pity. She wanted truth. She wanted to become someone who didn't need to be loved to feel worthy. Every day was a struggle, some filled with tears she never showed, others with moments of unexpected light. She still crossed paths with Leon sometimes, and he looked at her differently now, with guilt, with longing. But she never paused. She never gave him a chance to speak. Her silence was her answer, and it was more powerful than any revenge. She was no longer the girl who needed to be chosen. She was becoming the woman who chose herself. The campus festival arrived with golden lights strung across trees and the sound of laughter echoing across the lawns. Elena hadn't planned on attending, but her friend Mia gently coaxed her out of hiding, saying she needed the fresh air. She walked through the crowd with cautious steps, her senses overwhelmed by colors and noise. Music played softly from a nearby stage, and the air smelled of popcorn and cold coffee. She didn't feel like herself yet, not completely, but at least she wasn't crying anymore. It felt strange to be among people again, to smile at strangers, to exist in a space where no one knew her heart had been crushed. She found a quiet corner near the poetry booth and stood there, letting the breeze touch her face. A part of her still ached deeply, but another part was learning how to breathe again. And that was something. Adrian arrived with a small sketchbook tucked under his arm and a smile that made her chest feel oddly calm. "Didn't think I'd find you here," he said, handing her a cup of warm tea. Elena accepted it without hesitation, the warmth of the cup seeping into her frozen fingers. They stood in silence for a while, watching a fire juggler perform nearby. "Do you ever feel like everyone else has it all figured out?" she asked suddenly, her voice barely above the hum of the crowd. Adrian nodded without looking at her and replied, "All the time. But sometimes the broken ones write the most beautiful stories." Elena stared at him, surprised by how easily he understood her without asking for details. There was a softness in him that she hadn't known existed in people anymore. He didn't rush her. He never asked about the pain directly. But in his silence, she found more comfort than in anyone else's words. Across the festival lawn, Leon spotted her, and for a moment, time stopped for him. She looked different, not just in how she dressed or smiled, but in the way she stood. Stronger. Sharper. She wasn't looking for him anymore. She wasn't waiting for him to notice her. And beside her stood another man, one with kind eyes and the sort of calm Leon had never possessed. Leon watched them, unable to move, jealousy twisting through him like a knife. He didn't know the man's name, but he hated him instantly. Isabel noticed his gaze and clutched his arm tighter, but he shrugged her off without a word. All of a sudden, the woman he had so easily discarded seemed distant, a poor replacement for the love he had lost. Regret swelled in his chest, raw and gnawing. He wanted to go to Elena, to say something, anything, but the look in her eyes when they met his told him. He was too late. Elena hadn't expected to see Leon there, and the sight of him still made her breath catch for a second. Old wounds reopened with just one glance, but this time, she didn't fall apart. She held Adrian's tea tighter, steadied herself, and turned her back to Leon. Her heart raced, but she didn't crumble. That was progress. Isabel, ever the viper in silk, walked past Elena shortly after, flashing her a smug smile. "Still playing the wounded poet?" she whispered as she passed. Elena didn't respond. She didn't flinch. She just looked straight ahead. Isabel's words no longer pierced as deeply as they once did. They hurt, yes, but they didn't destroy her. And that silence, that strength, was louder than any insult Isabel could ever throw. Later that night, Elena and Adrian sat on a bench beneath a string of fairy lights. She told him a little more about her past, not names, not details, but just enough to reveal the shape of her scar. "I thought I was special," she admitted quietly. "But I was just someone's substitute." Adrian looked at her gently, then opened his sketchbook and showed her a simple drawing. It was of a cracked vase filled with blooming flowers. "Beauty doesn't come from perfection," he said. "It comes from surviving what tried to break you." Elena's eyes welled with tears, not from pain, but from the softness she hadn't known she still deserved. For the first time in a long time, she felt warmth growing again inside her. Not because of Adrian, but because she was starting to believe she could be whole, even after being shattered. And maybe, just maybe, that was the beginning of something real. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Elena, a storm that swept her from darkness into light, and sometimes back again. Leon's absence was a ghost that haunted her halls, in the classrooms, the cafe, and even the quiet corners of the library where they once whispered secrets. Rumors swirled around campus, some cruel and others pitiful, but Elena refused to give them power. She knew the truth behind her heartbreak, and no whisper could undo the pain or the lessons learned. Isabel's venomous smile haunted her less, yet the scars Isabel left were still raw. Elena often caught herself staring out of windows, wondering how a love that once felt infinite could vanish like smoke. Her friends rallied around her, but there was a distance she couldn't cross, a loneliness that no crowd could fill. Adrian's gentle presence remained a steady anchor, reminding her that kindness still existed in the world. She was learning that love wasn't supposed to hurt like this, that true love wasn't about shadows or replacements. It was about seeing and accepting something she finally began to believe she deserved. Meanwhile, Leon's world was unraveling in ways he never imagined. His nights were filled with restless tossing and turning, haunted by memories of Elena's tender smile and the way she looked at him with unguarded hope. Isabel, whose return had once felt like a homecoming, revealed herself as something colder, her affection a weapon to keep him chained. She mocked his regrets, reminding him that he had thrown away a love that was genuine for someone who wasn't even real. Leon's friends, who once teased him about his mysterious girlfriend, now looked at him with pity and disbelief. They whispered that he had lost the one girl who truly cared for him, that he was a fool blinded by the past. His pride shattered, and for the first time, he understood the weight of what he had lost. The pain of regret was harsh, unyielding, and it settled deep in his bones. But when he reached out, hoping for a second chance, Elena's silence was deafening. She refused to answer, refusing to open the door he had slammed shut. No apology could erase the humiliation she suffered or the nights she spent alone crying. One evening, Leon found himself outside Elena's dorm, standing beneath her window as if hoping to see her silhouette. But the light was off, the room dark and silent. He whispered her name into the night, his voice cracking with sorrow and longing. "Elena, please." But she didn't come. She never came. That night, he finally understood the price of betrayal. It wasn't just losing her, it was losing himself. Meanwhile, Elena sat inside, the tears she held back all these weeks finally spilling freely. She thought about the man who once promised love and the woman who destroyed it all. She thought about how fragile she had been and how fiercely she had fought to survive. Her heart still ached, but it was no longer broken beyond repair. She had found strength in her pain and dignity in her silence. The girl who had once cried quietly alone was now a woman who refused to beg for love that wasn't hers to keep. Adrian remained by her side, his support quiet but unwavering. He never asked for more than she could give, never rushed her healing, and never compared himself to the ghosts of her past. Instead, he showed her a kindness that was steady and true, a contrast to everything she had known before. With him, Elena learned to smile without fear, to trust without hesitation, and to dream without doubt. The future felt uncertain but promising, filled with possibilities she never dared to imagine. Each day was a step forward, each moment with Adrian a balm for her weary heart. She began to see herself not as a victim, but as a survivor, someone worthy of love that was pure and unconditional. And slowly, the walls around her heart started to crumble, letting in the light she thought she'd lost forever. Her story was no longer about heartbreak and betrayal. It was about hope, courage, and new beginnings. Yet, even as Elena blossomed, the past refused to fade completely. Isabel, sensing her hold on Leon weakening, intensified her cruel games, spreading lies, sowing distrust, and trying to pull him back into a toxic cycle. But Leon, battered and bruised, had changed. He saw her for what she really was, a poison disguised as a rose. The bitter truth had finally broken through the illusions he once believed. And as Elena's life began to brighten, his world darkened with regret, loneliness, and the harsh reality of a love lost forever. No second chances, no forgiveness. only the cold truth of a heart that chose wrongly. The tale of Elena and Leon was ending, not with a fairy tale, but with a lesson carved in pain. A story where one woman learned her worth, and one man paid the price for his mistakes. Elena's world seemed to hold a fragile peace, but beneath the surface, the wounds she carried were still raw and aching. The humiliation she endured at the hands of Isabel and Leon's friends replayed in her mind like a cruel film she couldn't stop watching. Sometimes, the memory struck so hard she would sit frozen, unable to move or speak, the weight of shame pressing down on her chest. She remembered the sneers, the whispered insults, and Leon's cold indifference, as if she were invisible. Her nights were the hardest, lying awake, tears falling silently in the dark, wondering if she was ever truly loved or if she had been nothing more than a shadow. The loneliness wrapped around her like a shroud, suffocating and relentless. But even in the darkest moments, a small voice inside her whispered that she could rise, that her story wasn't finished. Adrian became her lifeline during these nights, his presence a beacon of calm and compassion. He didn't ask for explanations, didn't demand her pain to be over. He simply stayed, offering gentle words and quiet hugs that never judged. One evening, as Elena sat curled up on her couch, tears streaming down her face, Adrian held her hand and said softly, "You're not alone. And you never will be." His kindness cracked open the hard shell around her heart, letting in a sliver of hope. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe in something beyond the hurt. But even as Adrian's warmth began to thaw her frozen heart, the scars of betrayal left by Leon and Isabel threatened to pull her back under. She feared trusting again, afraid that kindness would turn to cruelty as it always had. The pain had taught her to guard herself fiercely. Meanwhile, Leon spiraled deeper into regret and bitterness. The reality of losing Elena without any chance to make amends gnawed at him constantly. He found no comfort in Isabel's presence. Her sharp words and cold eyes reminded him of all he had destroyed. His friends' laughter, once a source of camaraderie, now felt like judgment. Leon's pride shattered, replaced by a hollow ache of loneliness. He tried to call Elena, send messages, but her silence was a fortress he couldn't breach. He began to realize that love isn't about possession or appearance, it's about respect and truth. But he had failed on every count. The nights grew longer, his remorse deeper, and the bitter taste of what could have been settled like poison in his soul. The man who once held Elena's heart now faced a future haunted by the ghost of his mistakes. Isabel, sensing Leon's despair, grew even more vicious. She spread lies about Elena, painting her as deceitful and unstable to anyone who would listen. Her words were sharp daggers, designed to isolate Elena and make her feel even more alone. Elena heard the rumors, cruel whispers in hallways and snide comments from acquaintances she once trusted. The humiliation cut deeply, threatening to undo all the healing she had fought so hard to achieve. But each time, she reminded herself of Adrian's steady kindness, the soft light that refused to be extinguished. She refused to let Isabel's venom define her. The fight to reclaim her dignity was exhausting, but Elena's spirit remained unbroken. She was learning that sometimes survival means standing tall even when every step forward hurts. In the midst of this turmoil, Elena discovered strength she never knew she had. She began writing again, pouring her pain, anger, and hope into pages filled with raw emotion. Her words became a refuge, a way to make sense of the chaos inside her. The act of creation was healing, each sentence a step toward reclaiming her identity beyond the shadows of Leon and Isabel. Adrian watched her transformation with quiet pride, always encouraging but never rushing. He understood that healing was a journey, not a destination. Together, they began to build a future not defined by past wounds, but by the possibility of new love and trust. Elena's tears were still there, but now they were mingled with smiles and moments of unexpected joy. The road was long and uncertain, but for the first time, she felt she could walk it, not as a broken girl, but as a woman rising from the ashes. Elena thought the worst was behind her, but the past had a way of clawing back when she least expected it. One chilly afternoon, while walking back from class, she caught sight of Leon across the crowded campus courtyard. He stood with Isabel and a few friends, their laughter loud and careless, a sharp contrast to the storm inside her. His eyes met hers briefly, a look full of regret and silent apology, but Elena's heart tightened with a painful reminder of all she had lost. She swallowed the lump in her throat and turned away quickly, tears threatening to spill. The humiliation she'd already endured seemed to deepen, sharper and more raw. Isabel's smirk was unmistakable as their eyes locked for a moment, a silent promise that the battle was far from over. Elena's breath caught in her chest, but she kept walking, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. That night, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number, a cruel reminder of how small her world felt. It was a photo of her and Leon from months ago, taken without her knowledge, captioned with mocking words from Isabel. The message crushed her, stirring up feelings she thought she had buried deep. She stared at the screen, her hands trembling, but before the tears could fall, Adrian's call came through. His voice was calm, steady, a lifeline in the chaos. "Ignore it, Elena. They don't deserve your pain." His words soothed her momentarily, but the damage lingered. The weight of being targeted so cruelly left her feeling vulnerable and exposed. It was a reminder that healing was not linear, and that some wounds reopened just when she thought they had healed. Elena wished she could vanish from the world, escape the whispers and stares. But she refused to let them win. Meanwhile, Leon's guilt twisted into anger. Anger at himself, at Isabel, and most of all, at the love he had thrown away. His friends tried to console him, but their words fell flat. They didn't understand the ache that settled in his chest each time he thought of Elena's face, how she had looked at him with hope and love, only to be shattered. He wanted to reach out, to beg for forgiveness, but he knew deep down that some mistakes were unforgivable. The bitter truth gnawed at him. He had lost the one person who truly saw him. Isabel's sharp tongue and constant demands only reminded him of the toxic relationship he had foolishly chosen. Alone in his apartment, he realized that he had traded love for a shadow, and that shadow had left him hollow. The pain of loss was no longer a lesson. It was a sentence he would carry forever. Isabel's cruelty escalated with every passing day, her words like acid dissolving the fragile peace Elena was trying to build. She whispered lies about Elena's character, her intentions, even her worthiness of love. Friends who once supported Elena wavered under Isabel's influence, creating a loneliness that cut deeper than any heartbreak. Elena faced these attacks with quiet dignity, but inside, the pain burned fiercely. She questioned herself, wondered if she had missed something, if she was somehow to blame. But Adrian never let her fall into that trap. His belief in her never wavered, his faith like a shield against the harshness of the world. With him, Elena found the strength to stand tall, to face the storm even when the winds howled cruelly. Every insult was a test she refused to fail. She was no longer the broken girl Isabel thought she could destroy. In the silence of her room, Elena poured her soul into her writing, the one place where her pain and hope could coexist without judgment. Her words became sharper, more honest, filled with the fire of a woman who had suffered but refused to be silenced. She wrote of betrayal, humiliation, and the slow, painful rebirth of self-love. Each page was a battle, a declaration that she would survive. Adrian read her poems, his eyes reflecting the depth of her pain and the strength she was forging. Their bond grew stronger, built on trust, respect, and genuine care. Elena's heart, though battered, began to beat with a new rhythm, one of resilience and quiet hope. She knew the road ahead would still be hard, but for the first time, she believed she could walk it without fear. The shadows of the past loomed, but they no longer controlled her steps. Elena had started to believe in new beginnings, and Adrian's steady kindness was the gentle light guiding her through the darkness. He didn't rush her healing or expect anything she wasn't ready to give. Instead, he showed up in small ways: a comforting smile, a hand offered without pressure, quiet support when she needed it most. His presence was like a warm blanket on a cold night, reassuring and safe. For the first time in what felt like forever, Elena felt like she could breathe freely without the weight of fear crushing her chest. It was a fragile hope, but it was real. They spent afternoons studying together in the sunlit corners of the library and evenings walking beneath the stars, talking about dreams and fears. Adrian's patience taught her that love wasn't just passion or pain. It was kindness, respect, and understanding. But healing was never a straight path. One afternoon, Leon showed up unexpectedly on campus, his face pale and desperate. He watched Elena from across the quad, his heart aching to reach her, to explain, to apologize. But Elena saw him first and turned away without a word. The coldness in her eyes was like a wall he couldn't climb. He wanted to call out, to beg for one last chance, but he knew the damage was done. The humiliation and betrayal ran too deep for forgiveness. Leon's regret weighed heavier than ever, a relentless burden that reminded him of everything he had lost. Isabel's presence only made things worse, her cruel laughter echoing in his ears. He was trapped in a world he had built with his own mistakes, alone, haunted, and broken. Elena refused to let Leon's appearance shake the progress she had made. She clung to Adrian's hand tightly, drawing strength from the love that was genuine and kind. Together, they faced the whispers and sideways glances that followed Leon's visit. Elena's heart still hurt, but it was no longer shattered beyond repair. She had learned to protect herself, to rise above the cruelty of those who tried to tear her down. Isabel's attempts to humiliate her became background noise, a distant storm she no longer feared. With Adrian, Elena found a new definition of love, one where she was seen, valued, and cherished for exactly who she was. It was a love that healed wounds instead of reopening them, a love that promised a future rather than haunted the past. One evening, as they sat beneath the fading light of sunset, Adrian looked at Elena with quiet admiration. "You've come so far," he said softly. "You're stronger than you know." Elena smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. She thought of all the pain, the betrayal, and the humiliation she had endured. But more than that, she thought of the hope that had grown inside her, nurtured by kindness and patience. "I'm learning," she whispered, "learning to love myself again." Adrian squeezed her hand gently. "And I'll be here, every step of the way." That moment, simple and profound, marked a turning point. Elena wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to live, fully, boldly, and with a heart open to new possibilities. Though the shadows of the past still lingered, Elena refused to let them define her story. She had faced betrayal, humiliation, and heartbreak, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Her journey was far from over, but with Adrian by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The pain that once seemed unbearable had transformed into a fierce determination to claim her happiness. And as the stars began to twinkle overhead, Elena finally allowed herself to believe in love again, not the love that breaks, but the love that heals. The tension in Elena's life reached a breaking point when Leon confronted her one rainy evening. His voice was shaky but desperate, begging her to listen just once. He admitted how much he had hurt her, how blind he had been chasing a ghost, and how regret had consumed him. But Elena's eyes, cold and steady, told him the answer he feared. There was no place for him anymore. She wasn't the fragile girl who had once waited silently, hoping he'd see her. She was a woman who had suffered, grown, and chosen to protect herself. Leon's words, heavy with apology, fell on a heart armored against pain. He had lost the right to her forgiveness. No second chance would come. The bitterness between them filled the air like poison, and with a final, broken glance, he turned away, leaving Elena stronger but still aching. The years of betrayal, humiliation, and misunderstanding had ended, but their scars remained. Isabel, watching from the shadows, reveled in her cruel victory, but even her venom couldn't touch the fierce light now burning inside Elena. The humiliation she had tried to impose was swallowed by Elena's newfound dignity. She no longer needed to fight for respect because she demanded it through her quiet strength. Elena's friends, who had once doubted her, now admired her resilience and kindness. Adrian stood by her side unwaveringly, the man who had loved her without conditions or doubts. He had become her safe harbor, the proof that real love existed beyond betrayal and pain. Together, they faced the world with hope, their bond a shield against past ghosts. Elena's journey through heartbreak had forged a new path, one of courage, self-respect, and true happiness. Her tears had dried, replaced by a steady light that no darkness could extinguish. Leon's friends whispered about the fall of a man who once seemed so certain, but they didn't understand the depth of his loss. His regret was a private torment, a wound that festered in the silence of his lonely nights. Every memory of Elena was a cruel reminder of what he had thrown away. He wandered through the empty rooms of his life, haunted by the echoes of promises he never kept. The man who had once held so much power over Elena now felt powerless himself. His bitterness grew, but it no longer held sway over her. Elena had broken free, leaving him to face the harsh reality of a love that could never be repaired. The cruel lessons of betrayal had left their mark, but only one of them would walk away with a future. The story's final act was unfolding, and Elena was ready to step into the light. Adrian, gentle and steady, had shown Elena what it meant to be truly cared for. His patience and kindness helped heal wounds that no apology ever could. Their love was quiet but powerful, built on trust and mutual respect. In Adrian's arms, Elena found not only comfort but also a reason to hope again. Their future was not defined by the past, but by the endless possibilities ahead. She realized that happiness was not about forgetting pain, but learning to live beyond it. The final chapter of her heartbreak was closing, and a new one, filled with love, respect, and joy, was just beginning. Elena was no longer a prisoner of her past, but the author of her own story. Her heart, once broken and bruised, was ready to beat for a love that deserved her. The morning sun spilled golden light through Elena's window, casting a warm glow over the room where she sat quietly, her heart finally at peace. The long, painful journey of heartbreak, betrayal, and humiliation was behind her now. Tears had dried, wounds had healed, and what remained was a strength born from every trial she had faced. She breathed in deeply, feeling the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, a reminder that she was alive, whole, and free. Adrian sat beside her, his hand resting gently on hers, a silent promise of love and loyalty. Together, they were no longer defined by the ghosts of the past, but by the bright future they would build. Elena smiled softly, knowing that this dawn was not just the start of a new day, but the beginning of a new life. Leon's world was crumbling as he watched Elena move forward without him. The regret that had once been a dull ache had turned into a sharp, relentless pain. He realized too late that the love he lost was the only true love he'd ever known. Isabel's venomous grip had failed to fill the void he left inside himself. Friends who once admired him now whispered about his downfall, a man destroyed by his own mistakes. He reached out one last time, desperate for forgiveness, but Elena's answer was clear and unyielding. No second chances. The pride he once held was shattered, replaced by the bitter truth that some wounds could never be healed by apologies or tears. The man who had once broken her heart was now broken himself, a tragic figure left alone with his remorse. Meanwhile, Elena and Adrian's bond blossomed into something beautiful and unbreakable. They shared quiet mornings and laughter-filled evenings, simple moments that stitched their hearts together. Adrian's kindness was a balm to Elena's weary soul, proving that love could be gentle and true. With him, she rediscovered joy and hope, learning to trust and open her heart again. Their love was not perfect, but it was real, grounded in respect and understanding. Elena found peace in knowing that she was valued for all she was, not just a shadow of someone else. The scars from her past had become part of her story, but they no longer controlled her narrative. Together, they looked forward to a future filled with endless possibilities. On the day Elena graduated, she stood tall in her cap and gown, surrounded by friends and family who had supported her through every hardship. Adrian's proud smile was the brightest thing in the crowd. Elena's brother, once unaware of the secret pain she carried, now saw her strength and resilience with new eyes. She had faced betrayal, humiliation, and heartbreak, yet here she was, victorious and whole. The applause echoed around her, but the true celebration was within her heart. She had fought for her dignity, reclaimed her happiness, and found a love that honored her. Elena's journey had been painful, but it had made her who she was, a woman ready to embrace the future with courage and hope. The chapter of pain had closed. The chapter of healing and love was just beginning. As the sun set on that unforgettable day, Elena and Adrian walked hand in hand through the quiet streets, their hearts beating in sync. The past was a distant memory, no longer a chain but a lesson learned. Elena looked up at the stars, feeling gratitude for the pain that once seemed unbearable, for it had led her to this moment of peace and love. Adrian squeezed her hand gently, whispering, "This is only the beginning." Elena smiled, tears of joy glistening in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered back, "a new dawn." And under the vast sky, with hope lighting their way, they stepped forward, together, into a future brighter than either had ever dreamed possible. Thanks for listening to my little stories. Your one subscription might seem small, but to a storyteller, it means everything. And the best part? More stories like this are on the way, so make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for the next chapter. Let's hit 1,000 subscribers together.